What's up, skeptics? Welcome to another episode of Reason to Doubt, your source for all things skeptical. I'm Jordan, and this is Jared to my right or left, whichever way Jared puts it in post. And today we're doing episode 3 of our series, So You Think You're an Atheist. At this point in the series, you've decided you are, in fact, an atheist, as we
because
discussed.
that is the logical conclusion. So.
It's the only reasonable conclusion, in fact. So we talked about what that is, what it means to be an atheist, and if you're with us this far, presumably you've come to that conclusion. Last episode, we talked about the conversations you might have with the people in your life and how to approach them. But we left the specific questions that tend to come up in those conversations for another episode because we wanted to hit them all at once and not like jam you with too much information. So now is that future date, just in time for the holidays. So we're going to prepare you for those dinner table conversations you're about to have with your drunk uncle. This is drunk uncle level apologetics. So this is not like the highbrow stuff you get from William Lane Craig or whatever. This is like it comes out in conversation that you haven't been to church during Thanksgiving and someone is like, well, not hounding you, but like they're peppering you with questions. That's what we're going to be tackling.
The target audience here for these conversations, these questions, because we're not encouraging you to go out and have these conversations. Typically what happens is somebody notices, like Jordan said, you haven't been to church in a while, or you're sitting around the thing and somebody notices your eyes were open while they were praying, but why were their eyes open and notice you? But whatever.
Yeah.
Or you refuse to pray during the meal and they go, what's going on? And you say, well, I just decided I don't believe anymore. Boom. Questions start. So
now go watch the second episode if you haven't, but a real brief recap of that. The takeaway for this is you don't owe this conversation to anybody. You don't have to have this conversation. And a lot of times this can get acrimonious, it can get contentious, and it may not be worth that kind of fight with your family, right? So if you want some tips on how to approach that and how to like structure that, go watch episode 2. But let's assume you've decided you want to engage in this conversation, or you're just drunk and can't resist. Here are some questions that people tend to get. So first one that comes up a lot is what happened to you, or like who hurt you? What bad experience did you have in church or because of somebody who's Christian that led you to this decision?
Yeah, that one is pretty common, actually.
Very common and more than a little condescending, in my opinion, because it assumes the only reason you've come to this conclusion is because you're like basically throwing a temper tantrum over some bad experience you had with a pastor or whatever.
I mean, and we're not talking about those kind of bad experiences with pastors or priests. We're talking about like, we're literally talking about serious stuff. Like they would assume like maybe there was something said in a sermon or a pastor was pressuring you to make a decision or whatever it could be. I mean, I can't even think of what would cause that.
Sometimes people have suggested that you had like a personality conflict or someone lied or hurt you in some way. And you're like, well, if this is what Christians are like, I'm out. And to be fair, that may have been part of your deconversion. I don't know why you listener chose to leave the church, but usually there's more than just that. Even if that was the instigating event that led you to like start questioning, typically that's not the whole reason why you've left. So how you respond to this depends on you. Like, why did you deconvert? And so you want to be prepared for this assumption that is often thrown on you and just be ready to deflect like, well, no, it's not an emotional decision. I was convinced for these reasons. Or, I have reasons why it wasn't that.
If there was some experience or like, church can be political at some point. So if there was something that happened at a church that they knew about, you could say, that did actually get me to start to think about my beliefs and my stuff, but it led me to these conclusions. And this is the reason why I no longer believe. Yeah.
I think the strategy is rather than rehashing the drama that led you down this road, if that's what happened, is reference it, acknowledge that it is a thing that happened, but then move away from it. Because that's probably not going to end up with any kind of, if that's a conversation you want to have, you want to be deliberate about that kind of conversation rather than having it over a turkey leg and some liquor at the dinner table. Right. But speaking of reasons why they assume you left the church, the next one, this is probably the single most common one I get is, well, you just want to sin. Or, well, I know why you're leaving. You're leaving because you don't want God to judge you, or you're afraid of being accountable, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, this one's very common. Most people won't just come out and say you just want to sin. Uh, but like Jordan said, it comes out in different ways, and it has to do with accountability. I think in order to actually get this, you have to be having a conversation with somebody pretty bold because this is more of like an internet kind of thing. But if you're having this conversation at a dinner table with somebody you know, and they're like, "Well, you just want to
I've
sin,"
I have not had it with a family. I have had people I knew in like real life who, when they found out I was an atheist, he was like, "Well, I know why you're an atheist." I was like, "Well, why don't you enlighten me?" And he was like, "It's because like you want to have sex out of wedlock or whatever." And I was like,
yeah, yeah. I mean, so some people may assume too, like, that if you're no longer practicing this religion, that you may be practicing another religion, or that you may be doing it to
worshiping Satan, for
worshiping Satan,
example,
for example. Yeah,
something I get
exactly.
accused of occasionally.
So,
It may also be phrased like, "How will you know right and wrong?" If you're not following the Bible, where are you going to get your morality from? So, how do you respond to this? I think the first thing to say is, well, no. Like, and also like kind of find common ground with the morality. Like, we both still agree on
mhm,
most things that are right and wrong, but you might have some real disagreement now. For example, when I left the church, I stopped being a homophobic asshole, you know?
yeah,
And that's good, right? That doesn't mean that I left the church because I'm gay or anything like that. It's because I don't part of what may have informed your decision is that. And so I think pulling the emphasis away from you and I, like, this is a thing that is definitely objectively wrong and you want to do it, but you want to avoid judgment. Like, pulling away from that and instead focusing on, no, I just disagree. And here's why I
yeah.
disagree.
The other thing you can do in this too is reassure that if it's somebody you care about, first of all, reassure them that you're still the same person, that you're still a moral person, assuming that you are a moral person.
You may
And
not be
that
moral in a way they recognize, but that
correct.
doesn't mean you're immoral.
And part of that is clarifying that, like, while you may still think that some of these actions are sin, I no longer believe that, eating shellfish is a sin. Like if you did,
Right.
most people, most
Or
Christians don't, whatever it is. But yeah. So just reassuring them that you're still a good person. You may not agree on what sin is or what constitutes a bad or immoral action, but that you still want to live a moral life. And
you can also maybe channel it into a discussion on morality if that's something you're interested in having. That might be like, well, I think that what makes something wrong is harming other people. And do you
yeah,
agree? Do you think that's what is makes something wrong? Okay, well then now we have common ground that we can talk about,
yeah.
right?
Or you could go
Also,
down
though,
like there
just
is
like
no
the
morals and I just want to do what I want to do
yeah,
anyway. So
but the premise, though, is really weird if you actually think about it, because it's like the premise is you know what's wrong. You actually, it's kind of implied that you know God exists because if there's no God, there's no sin, right?
right.
So, and you want to escape judgment. Well, me not believing in God doesn't do that because, like, or me saying I don't believe in God and just ignoring this knowledge that I allegedly have, that doesn't actually make me avoid judgment. It just it doesn't actually do anything. Like, I'm just doomed to hell for all eternity, right? If I actually wanted to avoid judgment, what I would do is sin as much as I wanted and then repent later. I just have to trust that at some point I'll be truly repentant,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. I know I've said this in this podcast, in this thing in the past, but I think I became a more moral person after I deconverted and became an atheist because before I always had that, well, I can just pray to make it go away kind of mentality. Like I can sin and then just ask for forgiveness later kind of thing, which is really messed up when you think about it. But
I think I became a more moral person not because I was like gonna get away with things when I was a Christian. I've always been very internally motivated, but I just became a more empathetic person. And that part of that could have just been me also maturing. So I
sure.
was like,
Yeah.
coming into adulthood. So it's hard to, just entangle the two. But certainly, like, rather than being, I've got this book says it's wrong, therefore it's wrong, having to be more deliberate, like, I don't have a book that that stops my thinking. I have to actually put time and effort into questioning what I'm doing, who it's impacting, how it's impacting them, which I think is key to being a better person.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I wasn't doing anything, like, super immoral back
Sure you weren't.
immoral
Sure. Okay.
in their Christian
Yeah.
sin sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
we believe
well,
you.
okay.
Yeah, okay. But now that you've done all these sinning, aren't you afraid of going to hell? Why aren't you like, doesn't that drive you?
Yeah, that's a question you may get asked at a dinner
And
conversation, right?
this one, the answer might actually be yes. I've encountered a lot of atheists who
Mhm.
don't who intellectually don't think hell is real and yet are still terrified of going to hell. And it's something that they struggle with all the time.
Sure. I mean, if you grew up in a church that preached, hellfire, all that stuff, the worm dieth not every Sunday, and was scaring you to salvation for your entire life, that is ingrained in you, and that is trauma that it's hard to get over quickly. So there are
Yeah.
resources for that. We mentioned that in the past. Freedom from Religion has people that can do it. There's certain counselors and behavioral health specialists who can help you work through those kind of things. But for this question, um, if assuming that it's not yes, you could pose the question or response by saying, "Well, now that I don't believe anymore, I don't actually believe that there is a hell," and then open up
Right.
that
Or
conversation.
you could say that other religious traditions have some form of punishment. Are you afraid of that?
Sure, you
And the
Pascal's
answer,
wager them. So
right. Yeah, like if according to this religious tradition, you'll be damned because you didn't believe in that God. Are you afraid of that? The answer is probably no. Well, why not? Because you don't think it's real. Well, just
exactly.
it's the same thing, except I don't think your thing is real. I'm no more afraid of hell than I am of Mordor. But because I don't think either one is a real place. Though it should be kind of a red flag, I would think, to the religious. This might be another angle you want to take, that so many people have that lingering religious trauma that even if they don't think it's real, they're still like scarred by the hellfire and brimstone. And is that really the kind of like, I understand if you think it's real, you want to warn people away from that. Like, I get where you're coming from, but this is really the emphasis we want to have. And it seems to be harming people. Is that really a good action to be harming people? But if God isn't real, you don't think hell is real, you don't think God is real, then what's the point? Why go on living at all? What's the ultimate meaning to your life? Like, where's your purpose in life?
Yeah, I mean, this does have to do with something that will get asked a lot, because I think it inherently tied up that if there is no eternal salvation, there's no life after death, then the thing that we're doing right here on earth right now has no meaning whatsoever, which doesn't make sense to me, but
Yeah, so I think this could be coming from sort of, if you're going to die and everything you did is gone, then what's the point?
right.
Which, I mean, my
Sure, it doesn't have
response to
no
that is
ultimate meaning, but
right.
sure.
Yeah. Like, what has meaning to me. And that's all that matters. Like, has meaning to me. But it also could be coming from almost a position of insecurity on the questioner's part. Because I know when I was religious, my religion, I thought, was the source of my meaning. Like I was, it was extremely important to me and my identity. And the idea of it being torn away seemed very scary. Right. And
Yeah,
so it's almost like you've had this thing torn away from you that I find extremely important. How can you survive that? And so I think just talking about the things that give you meaning, the things that you do in your life. Well, no, I have meaning from my family or from my kids or from helping other people. All of things give my life meaning. I think that that might lead the other person to perhaps do some self-examining. Because like it turned out after I was no longer religious, all the stuff like my life was just as me like it almost didn't change that part of my life at all, which was very surprising to me,
right. Like,
you
well,
know.
maybe this didn't matter to me at all to begin with, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, no, I think that's important. It also helps humanize you, the atheist. It helps normalize the atheist that we aren't just, Satan worshiping sinners, and we actually do care about things and we do find meaning. This kind of ties into like the fear of death thing as well. Um, my son has a crippling fear of death, and one of the analogies
Bro,
that we
same.
yeah, one of the analogies that we use to kind of help coax him or cope with it, help him cope through that is, the analogy of the birthday party, so if we were to have a birthday party and I told you and you knew that the birthday party was going to end, after a couple hours, you know, would you cancel the birthday party because you know it's gonna end? Or would you have fun with your friends at the birthday party, get your gifts, eat the cake and the ice cream, and enjoy it while it was, but knew that it was gonna end at some point? And that life is very similar along that we gotta make hay while the hay is making. What's that saying?
Make hay while the sun is up, I think is the
Yeah.
expression. I could be
Yeah.
wrong. I don't know. I think what I would do in that scenario, if the birthday party is life, is curl in a ball and cry, is what I would do, or just try to not think about it. That's usually my solution. Is like, well, I'm still young-ish, right? I've got like at least 30 years before I have
Yeah.
to worry about that.
Or you hope that you make it till technology is good enough to download
That's
your
what I'm
consciousness. Yeah.
that is 100% what I'm banking on for sure, no question. Like, I am practicing self-delusion to try to hold on to sanity here in this life, because death is terrifying. But anyway, here's one that it's almost a meme, but I do get it, is the old, "Look at the trees," or like, "What about babies?"
Yeah. I mean, I've had both of these. Somebody that I care deeply about has even said to me, I don't know how somebody can look at a baby and be an atheist.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I can. But yeah, it's the whole sense of wonder, right? And like the idea that this thing couldn't just happen randomly. Um,
Yeah. Life is so amazing. Therefore God, I guess. I don't
yeah.
know. They just kinda gesture vaguely at this wonderful thing, and then I'm not even sure where the leap is, but for some reason, because a thing is wonderful or you have a sense of awe, it had to be designed. I don't really know.
Yeah.
So, my strategy is just like, when they're like, "What about babies?" Like, "Well, what about babies?" Like,
Yeah,
just
maybe
keep
they
asking them,
poop,
like,
they
"Where's"
puke. Yeah.
like, okay, babies are awesome. I don't like why, and just like
Right.
digging out. Now, when I had this actual conversation with the coworker years ago, he was talking about that. He's like, "What about?" I was like, "Why?" He's like, "But babies," and I was like, "Yeah, but why?" And he was like, "But babies." Like it was. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
So perhaps a more fruitful lane would be to say, well, I can have a sense of grandeur and wonder at the world without there needing to be a deity. Like, even if this thing is a work of art from nature, that doesn't make it any less beautiful, right? Like, is art less beautiful if I knew that it was crafted by nature? Like if I knew that no being had designed the cosmos, does that make the night sky any less amazing? I don't see why it would.
It might make it more amazing, actually.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if it
Yeah.
feels if it feels more amazing to me. So I think
Yeah.
perhaps your common theme here, trying to find common ground, like, acknowledge the sense of wonder you get, but whereas you want to say, "Therefore God," or, like, giving this, like,
You
putting
attribute this
you're
wonderment to
attributing this to
God, yeah.
somebody, I don't feel the need to attribute it to anything. It just is, and
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah,
Uh,
from a personal note, I get I still get the same funny feeling I got when I was in church, when I go out on the trails in the mountains and I'm hiking or jogging, like, the idea that I'm surrounded by nature and that I have this oneness with nature still gives me that sense of awe and that feeling, so I definitely understand where this is coming from, but again, I don't you just have to say, I still get that feeling, I still think it's awesome, but we don't attribute it to the same thing.
right. You could drive to, like, a deeper. I think there might be a temptation perhaps to break down, like, well, why do we have this feeling about babies? Well, evolution, blah 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 blah
Yeah,
blah,
I
or
mean,
like,
that
but honestly, like, and I'm not saying those are not valuable things to know, but I don't think that's what the person asking this question is really asking.
yeah, and I
So,
imagine the person who's saying this, or asking this question isn't up to speed on,
and
creation apologetics or
probably
ID
doesn't care.
stuff,
So,
arguments, and they don't care, yeah, so
right. Kind of related, sometimes you'll get, what about love? You know, you can't explain love, like just because you can't see something doesn't mean it isn't real. What about love or gravity or magnetism, which we can see gravity and wind and magnetism and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. But like love, I have strong evidence for the existence of love, so it's another one
This
that seems
internal
silly.
yeah. Yeah.
But okay, what if you're wrong though? What if you're
Ooh.
wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. What if I'm wrong? Um,
Well, what if you're wrong?
yeah, well, you could just flip it back on them.
You
Well,
could.
what if I'm rubber, you're glue?
That's
So
right. uh, Sometimes couched with like, how can you be sure, or how do you know that God doesn't
yeah.
exist? And
Yeah,
so I think expressing like being honest with the fact that you are not necessarily 100% certain, and that's fine. Like being expressing the fact that you are comfortable with having some level of uncertainty, which for some reason just blows some people's minds. The
right.
idea that you might be okay with not knowing.
This is a good opportunity to go into maybe some of the reasons and justifications for why you don't believe anymore. And you can say, part of the reason that I don't believe is because I don't know. And I don't want to believe things without having a good reason to believe them. So if I were to know, then I might believe. But because I don't know, this is part of the reason why I don't believe
Right.
anymore.
I
And
need to have sufficient evidence for the
right,
things I believe, and I just don't have sufficient evidence anymore. And
yeah,
that doesn't mean that I am certain. It just means I'm not convinced. That's all that means. Sometimes if you might get this is more like an apologetic tool, but sometimes you'll get the old circle of knowledge thing. Like this is all the knowledge in the universe, right? And then you got your little circle. That's how much you know. How do you know God isn't over here somewhere?
yeah.
Uh,
But I don't.
so I don't, yeah,
Yeah.
but you could make the exact same argument for Santa Claus or pixies or unicorns or anything else,
But
and
Jordan, you're just being too skeptical at this point.
yeah, you're just being too skeptical. You're just doubting things for no reason. Have you tried doubting your doubts? Which still have no idea what that means. I actually somebody emailed me recently trying to like preach the gospel to me, and that was one of the things they said
Oh,
that I
wow.
don't doubt my doubts. Uh,
We should start a second channel, Reason to Doubt Your Doubts.
yeah, if somebody can understands what this means, please leave it in the comments because I don't know. The best I can figure is like, are you? I think maybe they might be putting some kind of mindset of dogmatism on me just in reverse.
Right.
Like, I have some kind of faith, like I don't have enough faith to be an atheist sort of mindset.
Sure.
Like somehow I'm motivated in my reasoning. And so if I got this question, I think I would try to dig and be like, well, what do you think is the appropriate level of skepticism? Like, if you think I'm being too skeptical, how skeptical
Yeah.
should one be? What does that
Just
look like?
skeptical enough that you still believe in God. That's
Right. Right, and that's actually the answer, and by
yeah.
getting them to, like, think about that, like, "Okay, well, is it okay for me to question?" Like, imagine that you're right, and a God did design me. He designed me to be curious and
Mhm.
to have intellect, uh, and so, like Galileo said, "I refuse to believe that the God who designed me with a brain intended me to forego its use." Like
Yeah. I think the appropriate response to this is to ask the question, well, like what does having too much skepticism look like? What does it mean to be too skeptical? And can you give me some examples of what somebody might be too skeptical? This they may be thinking of cynical, or you could be having too much cynicism. But yeah, I don't think anybody could ever be too skeptical unless they're, you know, going
unless
down the old like
you
I
can
can't
be
believe in anything kind of stuff. But
You can go hyper skepticism, but I think if you're sticking to a virtuous sort of
yeah.
skepticism, which we talked about, virtue epistemology with
Mhm.
Trolley Dave many episodes back. Go check that out. I think as long as you're engaging skepticism appropriately, then in that way you can't be too skeptical. But eventually, like it's almost like the horseshoe thing. If you're
Sure.
sufficiently skeptical, you end up not being skeptical at all. A lot of conspiracy theorists end up that way, you know?
Yeah. We talked that was a good video. You should watch that with Charlie Dave. We talk about Descartes and some of, I think therefore I am stuff. So
Yeah.
go check that out. But
But
the whole point is to try to get them to give you something that is too skeptical, and then
and
you can say, I agree, that is too skeptical. I
and
don't
that's
believe
not what
God
I'm
even.
doing, and
Yeah.
here's why. Like open a dialogue, get them thinking about what level of skepticism would be acceptable.
Mhm.
So, okay, we agree now you're not being too skeptical or whatever, but like, why not just keep it to yourself, man? Why do you gotta sprout your atheism, spray it all over,
Yeah.
just be quiet and go to church and stuff.
Didn't you just ask me why I wasn't an
Yeah.
atheist?
I'd
Like,
probably
didn't
sort
you?
of like, well, you asked me. You started
Yeah,
this conversation, Dave, Uncle
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
like
I've had people tell me this. Why can't you just keep it to yourself? Usually, this comes about in the point of the conversation where you've struck a nerve,
Mhm.
and you've
And
said something that triggered them to the point where they're getting upset. So,
and they don't like that they feel like you're telling them that they shouldn't be Christian or you're trying to take their faith away or whatever.
yeah. And if you go back to our last episode, this is one of the things. If you are being that atheist who's going and telling it on the mountain and just preaching to everybody about your newfound atheism, then maybe you should take a little bit of this
And
keep it to yourself
in that
mentality.
case, they might have a point, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. Like we've been treating this as if they're coming to you,
Right.
right? But if you are like at the dinner table attacking your uncle who is just trying to eat his meal about why he goes to church, then yeah, maybe you should chill out.
Yeah.
Just it's okay. Just calm down. But assuming that's not the case, then I think you can say, first of all, pointing out that if you're not doing that, you're not trying to convince anybody else
Sure.
necessarily. That it's fine if they believe in something as long as they're not harming other people,
Uh,
and that's fine. You can also ask, well, like you don't feel the need to keep your beliefs to yourself. Christians make it a big part of their identity to go spread the word, the Great Commission, missionary work. So why is it okay for you and people who agree with you to do this, but it's not okay for people who disagree with you?
because America.
Yeah, because shut up. That's why. you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great thing. Turn it back on them. Try to do it in a respectful way though, to where they can potentially see this is kind of like the outsiders test of faith. Let them see what it's like on the other side.
Right.
So
Yeah. So you are an atheist, and most people on Earth are theists. That means you think that you're right and everyone else is wrong. Almost everybody who ever lived, Newton, is wrong. You think you're smarter than Isaac Newton, Jared?
well,
Well, first of all,
kind
Newton
of.
was kind of weird and freaky and believed a lot of weird
Yeah,
stuff.
he like alchemy and all kinds of stuff, right? Like,
Yeah. So,
yeah,
like, my response when someone's like, "What?" Like, the response I want to give is like, I mean, yeah, kind of.
uh,
Like, I mean,
I mean, I
when you put it that way, yes.
sure.
Like,
Yeah.
like, yes, I do think that I'm correct. If I didn't think I was correct, I wouldn't hold the position I hold. I'd hold
Right.
whatever I think the correct one is. And because my position is opposite to most people's, yes, I think I am right, and most other people are wrong.
Yes. The other thing to do here too is to go down the route of, well, I don't necessarily think I'm right. I just don't think I have enough evidence right now to justify a belief in this particular deity that we're talking about. Unless, of course, you do find yourself in a point where you've done the research, you've thought through the experiments, you've gone down all the logical paths, and you've determined that, yes, deity X does not exist because the evidence doesn't support that. Um, if you're at I don't think you're at that point though, if you're just now coming out as an atheist. You probably haven't done that much stuff, so
Now, I think where you can give some ground back is like I'm not going to concede that. Yes, I think I'm right, and I think the people who disagree with me are wrong because that's just what it means to have an opinion. Like that's just what opinions are, right?
yeah.
So, I guarantee this person that you're talking to thinks
As they're
something that most people disagree with them on, right?
as they're eating their canned cranberry, jelly at the table. So why do you think you're right that cranberry jelly is good?
But
You
that's a
think I'm
subjective
wrong?
thing.
Like,
But there's
yeah,
factual
yeah,
things I'm certain that they believe in that other people disagree with. And now you can say that you don't think that it's unreasonable for people to disagree with you because reasonable people can disagree.
sure.
Like I can think A and you can think B, and it doesn't mean either one of us is unreasonable or irrational. We just have different opinions. Very smart, well informed people can look at the same evidence and come to different conclusions. That's just the human condition. And so making it clear that you're not saying that they're an idiot or stupid or anything because they think this or some kind of superstitious peasant or whatever. And if you do think those things, go watch the second video and chill out. But but yeah, emphasizing that it's okay for people to disagree, that that doesn't mean that you can't still have a relationship, that sort of thing. Kind of disarming, because I think where this question is coming from is they feel attacked by the fact that you think this thing that is central to their identity is false, is not real. This
Which you do probably,
What
but
you do, right.
yeah.
And so that may be uncomfortable for them, but clarifying that just because you think that they're the deity they believe they have a relationship with doesn't exist, uh, that doesn't mean that you think poorly of them necessarily.
Yeah, and if that is the way they're coming from, that's one thing. If they're coming at this question from like superiority complex, like you think you're superior than everybody else, or you're smarter than everybody else, you could just clarify with them like, I just on this one topic I may disagree, but that doesn't mean that I'm smarter than you on anything else. This
Right.
is just the one thing we're talking about. So
Yeah, I'm a pretty smart guy. I am not the smartest person on the planet, that's for sure. And there are very smart people who are smarter than me who are religious and disagree with me. There are also people smarter than me who aren't religious. Like this is not a smart people versus dumb people thing, you know?
right.
So,
I mean, and averages though, if we're being honest,
well, I'd want to. We can leave the statistics of that to another episode. Okay, so those are all the contentious sort of questions. The last question is the question that you might hope you get. If you get this question, things are going great. And that question is, well, what convinced you? You think this
ding
thing?
ding
Why do
ding
you think it?
ding. Yeah. You should have like
That
a gold star, like ready sticker, ready. Like, here you go. You get a
Yeah.
gold star.
This should be the first question anybody asks. If in my experience, it will not be. But
If
maybe
they
you'll
ask it at all.
if they ask, yeah. Often it comes at the end. Hopefully it comes at the beginning. But this question indicates that the person you're talking to actually cares about you and what you think and why you think it. This is not a question that someone generally who is defensive or offended is asking. You can obviously tell if that's where they're coming from. But if the question is honest and open, then try to control your excitement and then you can feel free to engage in a dialogue. Do not, however, use this honest open question as an invitation to shit all over them and the things they
Right.
believe.
The other thing you can do is you can divert to this question if you want. So
Right,
if somebody comes at you a little combative and be like, I don't really feel comfortable answering these questions. I feel like I just want to keep this to myself. If you're actually interested in what convinced me, though, I'd be willing to talk with you and have that conversation with you, but I
right.
don't want to engage in this other sort of tit for tat kind of thing.
You can also use this question yourself because just like you may feel validated and perceived and seen when someone asks you honestly what convinced you, you can ask the other person that. Well, you clearly disagree with me. You're passionate about what you think. Why do you think the way you do? What convinced you? And then when they share yours, the natural way the conversation is going to go is for you to share your own reasons. And now
Yeah.
instead of like being two people fighting, you're two people sharing your human experiences, which is more likely to come to a positive conclusion even if you don't agree.
Yeah. And just in general, too, while we're wrapping this up, it's important to actually have a conversation, practice active listening, rephrase questions, make sure that you're understanding each
Right.
other along the way,
You
ask them
said
questions. Yeah.
active listening looks like you said this or rephrasing. Or how what I heard was this, or if I'm understanding you, what you meant was, you know, am I right?
It allows you to be on the same page throughout. It actually shows that you're engaged and you care about what they say about. But it just makes for better conversation. Don't get into a conversation where you just find yourself like spitting out like all the common things that you find out when you're an atheist. Well, did you know there's so many contradictions in the New Testament? Did you know that there's no devil in there? Like, there's no like, don't do that. Okay, like,
Yeah,
um, so
you're not gonna get anywhere. Literally nobody on earth,
well, you probably
nobody,
wouldn't get anywhere anyways. But
right? But I guarantee you're not gonna make any headway by telling them how many contradictions there are in the Bible. They don't care. So focus on the goal, and the goal, I think, in these conversations, in the context we're talking about them in, is probably, or at least I would contend, should not be to convince this other person that you're right. The goal should be to find common ground and to be able to engage with somebody you disagree with on something that's important to them without damaging the broader relationship. That should be the
Yes.
goal. So if you
Yes.
get away with this, if you get out of this conversation with your relationship intact and everyone having a better understanding of the other person's position, then that's a win. You should take
And
that.
if you do find yourself at any point in a conversation with anybody, particularly family members, and it starts to get emotional, you could say, "Hey, clearly this is a very serious topic. I can see that you're, you know, emotional about this. Let's not have this conversation right now. Let's go back to talking about the Detroit Lions and why they're the best football team in America right now. Like, just do that." So,
Right. Or why some other I don't know anything about football, so I don't know. Assume I
I mean,
said something devastating about the
I,
rivals.
I'm
I don't know.
I'm assuming you're at, Thanksgiving dinner. At football. But anyways, whatever the common ground is, go back to that and say, "Hey,
Right.
let's talk about last, week when we were at the bowling alley and you
Right.
got a strike on him."
Because ultimately, if you are right, you being the atheist, if you're right, when they die, nothing will happen and it won't matter at all what they believe. So who cares? Like, whatever.
So have fun at the birthday party, eat some cake, open some presents.
And try to keep your existential crises in your bed alone in the dark where they belong. So that's our show. Hopefully, these conversations that you have go well. Please share in the comments if you have one of these conversations, what happened, or if there are other questions that you receive commonly or you did receive when you were deconverting and having these conversations. Leave those in the comments below. Anything that you can leave for the people who might be watching this video who are just coming into disbelief might be helpful for them.
Yep.
Also, let us know what sort of questions, if you are in that position and you're someone who's new to atheism, what questions do you have? What things are confusing to you? And we might hit it in another episode. I'm not sure we have one plan for this series, but if there's something that you would find helpful, let us know. Make sure you subscribe, hit like if you liked it. If not, tell us everything in vivid detail that you disliked down below. And until next time, remember, you've always got reason to doubt.
Peace out.